The door shrieked as she slid the rusted bolt home, palms black with dust, listening to footsteps thudding somewhere overhead like a heartbeat gone wrong. Spray-painted survey lines glowed faintly on the tunnel wall. New, bright, official. They meant one thing. People were coming. If they found this room, her room, everything she had guarded would be hauled away, boxed as evidence or drowned when they sealed and flooded the spur. She glanced at the shelves. Jars, tapes, letters, a ledger of borrowed names. Stay invisible, lose it all. Step into the light, risk herself. She pulled on her pack and chose movement. She called herself an archivist because the word felt like a promise. Quiet. Careful. Necessary. Her hands had learned the ritual. Brush the grit away. Breathe. Label without judgment. She had rules pinned in her head like thumbtacks. Take nothing that's still wanted. Write down what you learn. Leave room for return. The spur was a forgotten rib off the city's old backbone. 100-year mistake that never met its train. Muffled streets above, dripping stalactites below. She had mapped every crosscut and crawl space by feel. A handmade diagram folded into plastic and sealed. Her catalog was a patchwork of index cards and scavenged manila folders, taped spines soft as cloth. The light came from solar lanterns and a battery she nursed with stubborn patience. Each object was a door. A brass button with a nick shaped like a crescent moon. A plastic bus pass punched through with teeth marks. A paper program from a church basement play with one line underlined twice. Be brave. She didn't steal. She retrieved from the city's seam where things fell, slid, or were shed. Platform gaps, chain link edges, flooded stairs where maintenance forgot to look. At night she listened. A cassette player with a cracked lid, kept together by a rubber band and hope. On a tape rescued from beneath a broken tile, a voice sang a lullaby in a language she didn't know. No preface, no date, just a hum catching on a smile. She played it low while she sorted, letting the sound hold the air like a hand. Her past was a quiet bracket around every choice. Doors closed, files stamped. She had learned that official attention came with clipboards and consequences, and so her archive grew under the radar, a sanctuary built out of other people's almost forgotten selves. She wrote provenance notes where she could. Corner of 9th and Deep, wedged under rail. Found with red scarf, wrapped in receipt. Call me when you get home. 3 days ago, orange grease pencil marks bloomed on the tunnel wall. Numbers. Arrows. A date scrawled in tidy block letters. She followed them to the old floodgate and stared at the stencil. Seal. Pump. Decommission. This place would be a sealed mouth. The water that sometimes lapped quietly at the ankle would rise and stay. It wasn't only shelves and boxes. It was identity folded into index cards. She had become the person who kept watch, who refused to let a city's forgetting wash clean. If the room drowned, what did that make her? Options clicked through like slides. Disappear with what she could carry and lose the rest. Try to make a case through channels that had never opened for her. Or send a flare where people still cared about quiet truth. She wrote a note on a clean card, printing slow so the letters wouldn't tremble. There is an archive underground. Not a hoard. A promise. She padded it with a cassette copy of the lullaby, and the paper map annotated in blunt pencil, one word looped at a junction. Home. She sealed the bundle in a hardware store box and waited for the hour when alarms slept. The surface always felt too bright. She moved like water in a coat that didn't belong to anyone, avoiding the blue glow of security cameras, counting steps, listening for the bark of questions. The community center's drop slot yawned. She fed the box through and heard it settle with a soft thud, as if it exhaled. Back underground, she washed grit from her nails and sat with the ledger open. She wrote new rules. If discovery comes, make it on your terms. If you must speak, speak for the stories first. Then, for the first time in years, she drafted a message to a voice she trusted to carry careful things. A late-night radio host who played songs like Whispers and asked callers to tell him where it hurt. She signed it with the name the tunnels had given her, the Undertown Archivist, and pressed send, knowing that some doors only open from the outside. She lay awake, counting breath and risks. Recognition meant safety for the archive, maybe. But it also meant eyes on her, questions she couldn't afford to answer. Cameras, lists, the past tugging at her sleeve. Still, the pumps would not wait. Want collided with mistrust like two trains on the same track. She needed something physical, proof you could hold without breaking it. A sample, not a surrender. One box that could speak for the rest. She chose as a librarian might, not a marketer. A letter never mailed. A brass button set in a folded tissue. A cassette with the lullaby's twin carefully dubbed. And a photograph of a stoop with a chalk hopscotch grid fading under rain. She added a single index card with her clean, pared-down creed. Dignity first. No sales. Return if you can. Remember if you must. She wrapped the bundle in brown paper and twine, a kind of grace in the neatness, then slid it into a hinged milk crate she had wiped down until it no longer remembered milk. The crate felt like a small animal at her hip as she shouldered her pack and started the climb. She moved along the service passages where tiles were missing, and old posters flaked into papery snow. Up the maintenance stairs that ended behind a locked grate she'd taught herself to lift with a bent spoon and a steady hand. When she emerged into the shadow of the community center's rear lot, a cat glanced at her, yawned, and turned away. She envied that ease. The plan was simple. After-hours drop, no faces, no doorbells. The building was a patchwork of murals and repairs, a place that knew how to learn from damage. She skirted the security camera's fixed gaze and hugged the brick until the drop slot appeared beneath a bulletin board that promised gardening lessons and tax help. Her heart pounded so hard she thought the paper might pick it up. A motion light flared, blunt, indifferent, bright. For a breath, she froze, every story of detention and paperwork clawing up her spine. There is an archive underground, she had written. A promise. If she ran, the crate might tip and scatter, just another mess for someone to sweep away. She set the milk crate down, slid the brown paper bundle from it, and fed the package through the slot. It slid with a sticky reluctance before dropping, a soft thump that felt like releasing a kite into a wind she couldn't see. On an impulse, she took the crate back. Leaving no container meant fewer fingerprints of her habits. She wiped the edge of the slot with the sleeve of her coat and stepped backward into the dark. She signed the note inside with the name the tunnels had given her, the Undertown Archivist. To the outside world, it might sound like a myth. Down here, it was a job title. Back underground, she waited with the kind of patience learned from bad news and long hallways. At midnight, the radio host read her message in a careful voice that didn't sensationalize. A caller cried quietly. Another asked if it was performance art. A third said they remembered a lullaby like that. Around 2, a producer mentioned a box left at a local center and promised to look into it. Morning arrived as a rumor of footsteps above and a faint hum of vents kicking on. She brewed coffee in a dented tin and listened to her own breath. By afternoon, the box had earned a small mention on the host's late segment. An intriguing drop, likely a hoax or a nostalgia experiment. No promise, no address to help. The word myth returned and stuck like gum. She cataloged her disappointment as if it were an object. Heavy, scuffed, still useful. Out came a water-stained train map she'd found folded and tucked behind a broken tile near a platform bench. Someone had written one word across a junction in a pencil that pressed hard. Home. The pencil had dented the paper, and even now, the groove carried the force of a hand that wanted to believe in a location for belonging. She copied the word into her ledger and sat with it. Home. She had made one. The city was already measuring it for burial. The pumps tested early that evening. A low, purposeful growl rolled through the spur and turned the thin water at her feet into trimmer. On the far wall, a hairline crack grew from a joint like ink crawling into paper. She put her palm against the shelf as if she could hold it still. On a top board, jars vibrated, labels blinking, the consonants turning to flicker. She made lists until the fear could fit on a page. The first try had placed a seed and received a shrug. The box hadn't failed. It had failed to be seen. She needed something louder that still refused spectacle. A visible find, one that could drag a camera lens down to the level of a human hand. No auction, no ad. She wrote new rules in the ledger margin. If you must be loud about care. Then she began to build a better trap for attention, laying out a small constellation of truth that could not be dismissed as a single strange package in the dark. As the hum of the test pumps faded, she traced a different path on her map, not to exits, but to eyes. She needed a place where lost things mattered and stories traveled on cups and conversations. The coffee shop by the old tram loop had a wall of mismatched mugs and a lost and found basket that overflowed into a wooden crate. People checked it like a ritual. If something appeared there, it would be seen by the right kind of attention first. She built the bundle on the floor with the care of a memorial. Letters in a rubber-banded stack, edges softened by being read too many times. Polaroids that had kept their ghosts. A birthday cake with a single candle. A hand held up to block the flash. An empty chair at a lawn table. A brass key tagged with a paper circle that said only P.O. The Lullaby's twin cassette, labeled in her measured hand. For listening, not owning. An index card with a gentle note. These are not props. Please handle with care. Return paths on reverse. She added provenance notes like breadcrumbs. Bench under the clock. Line C, near the poster for flu shots. Found between grate and gum. Retrieved from a puddle after the storm. She refused anything that felt like bait. No sensational photos, no shock. Dignity first, even now. Especially now. The shop's back door was scarred and always slightly ajar for deliveries. She waited for the rain to lift and the dinner rush to peak. A time when staff were busy but not exhausted. When a discovery could feel like grace, not burden. She wore a coat with a different weight and a cap that shadowed her eyes. The city's noise flattened her breath, but she kept moving. Inside, the air smelled like sugar and burnt espresso. At the end of the counter, the lost and found crate sat beneath a handwritten sign. Take what's yours, leave what isn't. A college kid in a paint-splotched hoodie rummaged for a glove, A man with careful hair tucked a scarf back in with a sigh. She set her bundle at the bottom of the crate and lifted a stray umbrella to hide it just enough. Not too deep. Not too obvious. A found thing should feel like it wanted to be found. She left with a receipt in her pocket and her pulse drumming. By the time she crossed the alley, the bell over the door jingled, and a small chorus of voices rose in curiosity. Soft, surprised. She ducked behind a van and exhaled. The thread had been pulled. That night, the city made a story out of itself. A barista posted a photo of the brass key on a napkin and wrote, "Anyone missing something important?" Comments unfurled, a human river. Someone recognized the church basement in a Polaroid and told a story about a potluck where they met their wife. Skeptics arrived in force, sharp and bored. Plant, viral ad, performance art. She didn't answer. The archive didn't need to argue. Within hours, a thread swelled on a local forum. Undertown truthers versus Undertown deniers. On the 5th page, a librarian's handle appeared with a measured post. They cataloged the paper types, dates visible in the margins, the ink aging, the stamp from a defunct post office, and the way the cassette label's adhesive had bled into the paper backing over years, not days. Their tone was calm, careful, not an endorsement, a consideration. It felt like the room tilting toward respect. The tide turned, just a little. A reporter asked for tips. A podcaster speculated about tunnels. Location hunters posted shaky videos from stairwells and service gates, breathless and loud. One night, a pair of scavengers drifted down the spur that fed into her corridor. Laughter echoing, beer bottles ticking against tile. They followed the glow of her lanterns like moths toward a sun she couldn't let them see. She had predicted this. She hadn't predicted the heat of panic that rose in her throat when she saw chalk arrows freshly scrawled near a maintenance hatch, pointing into the dark with a gamer's confidence. This way. This way. She moved as if the floor might crack. In 3 hours, she fragmented parts of the archive that had taken years to gather. Milk crates filled, lids clicked on, tape squealed. She slid boxes into a culvert and covered them with tarp. She tucked a set of letters into a hollow behind a crumbling tile and mapped that with an X only she would understand. The bundle had done its job. It had also drawn hunters who smelled a prize. She needed a counterweight, one person she could trust with a door to her. The librarian's post had sounded like care dressed as evidence. Steady, not hungry. She listened again to their words, how they ended with an ask. If the source wishes to speak, I can offer quiet procedures and protection. Their institution had a small seal she recognized, public, not private, with policies that took note of consent. She rolled a clean index card toward her, the pen heavy and sure in her fingers. You saw what others didn't. Thank you. If you can promise stewardship without spectacle, I will show you what I can. She included a copy of the provenance notes and the lullaby on a fresh cassette, the hum a bridge. She added a single condition. No cameras, no press, no names until permission is written. At the top of the card, she wrote a meeting time like a shared secret, when the city was a thin veil and clocks felt loose on their hinges. 3:47 a.m. She drew a small square to mark a grate near the old station door, the one that opened onto air that smelled faintly of mineral and wet iron. She signed it the only way she could. Undertown Archivist. The envelope felt like a key she could only use once. She stepped into the early morning's slice of wind, found the librarian's stoop, and slid the packet beneath their door. As the streetlight flickered, she stood for a breath. then let the city swallow her back down. Dawn didn't reach the tunnels, but she felt it anyway. The city changing gears above, the air shifting. She sat with the ledger, a finger marking yesterday's rule. Stewardship without spectacle. Beside it lay the recorder cued to the lullaby's soft first note. She let it play once, then clicked it off, pocketed the tape and tied her boots. Trust was a door. She would open it a fraction. By late afternoon, her nerves were a taut wire. She paced the service corridor where mineral smell folded into damp cold. At a precise minute, she climbed toward the grate they had agreed on, a square of rusted bars set into a wall like a confession window. The station above had been closed for years, but that didn't mean empty. She listened for metal on metal, for the scrape of a curious shoe. At 3:47, a small beam of light softened the dark on the other side of the grate and stilled. No camera glare, no chatter. Just a person's quiet intention held in a palm. The librarian crouched, face in shadow, breath visible as a faint thread. "I'm here," they said softly. "No names. Thank you for trusting me this far." She didn't kneel. She stood back from the grate, a shape more than a face. "I brought what you need to understand this isn't a stunt." She slid an envelope through the widest gap. Inside, index cards with provenance notes written in her careful hand. A list of conditions, a consent template, and the cassette with the lullaby, labeled simply, "Home." The librarian didn't reach immediately. "Before I take it, I want to say what I can offer. A process. Anonymity. A small team bound by ethics, not cliques. If you say stop, we stop. If you say no, it's no." The words loosened something in her chest. She exhaled a breath she hadn't noticed she was holding. "They're scheduling pumps," she said. "The archive will drown if it stays. I need help to move it without turning it into a spectacle. I need protection for the people inside these stories." "And for you," the librarian said, not as a question. She considered. "If that's possible, yes. But first, the stories. Then me." They accepted the envelope. Their fingers were steady. "I'll return with a portable scanner and a cart. Quietly. No one else." "Tomorrow night," she said. "1 hour before the schedule. We'll pace them." The light clicked off. Footsteps retreated with care. For a moment she rested her forehead against the cool bar and let the damp sink into her skin. She allowed herself a small, silent gratitude aimed at the thin seam where two strangers had agreed on a boundary. Back in the archival room, she pulled tarps, consolidated crates, made a triage list in pencil. Each item she touched, she spoke to under her breath. A simple promise. Soon. The pumps were a metronome in her head. Hours, not days. The first sign that the seam was fraying came as a rumor of presence. She returned from stashing a box in the culvert and found a bright arrow sprayed on the tunnel floor she had scrubbed clean 100 times. It pointed toward her door, bold and sure, a map for the impatient. Her pulse spiked. She followed the chalk backward and found, near a bolted hatch, someone had drawn a heart with the words, Undertown, ILY. Affection as invasion. She scrubbed the chalk with a rag until a gray smear remained. That was when another ghost appeared, the muffled click of a camera shutter somewhere up tunnel, followed by the hiss of whispered excitement. She killed her lantern, crouched, and waited. Two silhouettes paused where the corridor widened. One held a phone high, the other traced a line on the wall as if the tunnel were theirs to annotate. She didn't move until they passed. Then she doubled back, took the long loop, and sealed a false door with a chain and a danger gas sign she had found years ago. She added a second lock to her real door and placed a mirror at an angle to let her see who approached without being seen. Trust was still a door. Now it had to be barricaded. By the time she reached the grate again, a new light moved like a searching thought. The librarian's voice came through tight. Something's happened. What? A volunteer, well-meaning I believe, mentioned our exchange to a friend who freelances. They thought attention would protect you. The friend told their editor. I found a message asking for comment on the Undertown source. I said nothing. I'm so sorry. Her mouth went dry. The old panic rose, edged and efficient. Which entrances? I don't know. I've already contacted the volunteer and made the boundary clear. I'll meet you anyway. But we need to assume others are looking. She heard it then. Distant voices ricocheting off tile. A clatter like a tripod against metal. Laughter pressed flat by concrete. She imagined arrows multiplying like a rash. She imagined the archive lit by strangers' beams, reduced to a backdrop. You can't come down the main stairs, she said. Use the service shaft by the broken clock. Bring blankets for muffling. If you're followed, don't lead them. We'll switch to the culvert route. I understand, the librarian said. I'll leave my phone behind. Paper maps only. That's not enough, she said, and felt how her voice hardened. From now on, we speak only here. No texts, no emails. If anyone asks, you don't know me. I don't know you, they repeated. A vow shaped like a fact. They slid one more thing through the grate. A folded letter on institutional letterhead. Not a contract. A pledge. Stewardship without spectacle. Consent first. She took it, felt the dry paper against her damp palms, and tucked it into the ledger, under the page where she had written rules like prayers. When she returned to her door, fresh arrows bloomed, this time in paint, not chalk. Someone had come while she was gone and marked the precise curve where the corridor bent. Her stomach dropped. On the far wall, a tagger's scrawl shouted a handle. Not a hunter now, a flood. She traced the paint with a finger and felt the raised edge. Still tacky. They were close. She turned the bolt, stepped inside, and braced her back against the door. The pumps would start in 24 hours. Now it felt like less. She could move. Or she could reveal everything and hope process would outrun protocol. She closed her eyes and tasted rust. Trust had opened a door. Betrayal had walked in behind it. As the city's last trains sighed to a stop, she rolled the cart from its hiding place and felt every bolt announce itself. The squeal wasn't loud, but underground it carried, a thin, complaining violin string. She wrapped the handle with cloth to mute the rattle and checked her list. Milk crates labeled in pencil and tape, batteries topped off, blankets for sound. The ledger zipped into her pack like a spine. She wanted to save it all intact. Time wanted the opposite. The pumps would begin before dawn, and the tunnels were a maze that changed meanings when fear pressed on it. She steadied her breath and started with the heaviest shelf first, the one with glass jars and letters bundled by seasons. Each crate got a short blessing as it lifted. You matter. You're seen. We're going. The first corridor rose, then narrowed, a throat with exposed ribs. She angled the cart, coaxed it. The front wheel clipped a pipe and squealed in protest. She stopped, listened. Far away, a laugh. Closer, the tap of something metal knocked against something harder, like a baton against a stair. She moved faster, not careless, just honest about the clock. At the ladder, she knelt and tested the hinges with her palm. The aluminum had been faithful for years, a collapsible skeleton she trusted. Tonight, as she shifted weight to climb, a rivet she'd watched but never feared decided to give. The side rail bowed and snapped with a sudden, sharp decision. The top third of the ladder sheared left, and the crate she balanced tipped. Photographs fanned into the air like startled birds and drifted down into the shallow, oil-sheened water. She swore once, in a whisper, and waded knee-deep, fingers fast and gentle. Each photo she lifted, she named. Birthday, graduation, stoops. A pair of hands clasped at a hospital bed. She wiped them against a dry section of her shirt and laid them across the blankets on the cart like fragile skin. One drawing had slid farther, caught in a slow swirl. She reached and found a child's bright stairway, each step labeled up in trembling block letters. She pressed it flat against her chest to warm it dry, then slid it into her jacket pocket, close as a heartbeat. Up, she said to the pocket. We're going up. Without the ladder, the route changed. She pivoted to the culvert path, lower, longer, safer only if she didn't meet anyone coming the other way. She lashed the broken ladder to the cart, turned the wheels so they faced the slope like shoes, and pulled. The squeal returned, more tired than before. She pictured sound as a rope she had to keep from spooling too far. At the next junction, a shadow detached from a darker shadow, soft as breath. The librarian stepped into a slice of lantern light, hair tucked under a knit cap, a hand up in greeting rather than arrival. No phone, a canvas satchel, blankets held like offerings. I came the clock way, they whispered. No one followed. What do you need first? Wait off, fast, she said. Anything with names, then tapes. They fell into a rhythm that felt like a language they'd both once known. Crate to cart, cart to culvert, blanket over the loudest corners. Tape strips pulled slowly, lifted like bandages, then pressed down again. She watched the librarian handles papers the way she did, with fingertips, with respect. Keep your steps on the dry line, she murmured. Wet patches are pooled, not shallow. They nodded, matched her pace, made themselves small in the space without shrinking their care. For a while the only sounds were breath, wheel, water, and the low, distant thrum of machines testing muscle. The reversal arrived like weather turning, a breeze that came from the wrong direction, bringing voices with it. An enforcement team, not quite running, more alert than curious. Radios chattered. A flashlight bloomed and slid along the far corridor like a thought searching for a word. They're early, the librarian said, the words small and obvious. Roots collapsed to the shaft, she answered. We can make one more trip if we're lucky. Luck tripped on a threshold. At the bend before the shaft, a gate that should have stayed propped had fallen. The hinge had rusted into stubbornness. The latch had learned a new habit. She shouldered it. The metal gave just enough to sing, but not enough to open. She could force it with time she didn't have and noise she couldn't afford. She looked at the librarian, at the loaded cart, at the corridor, already brightening in fits, as lights flicked on and off with approaching beams. The pumps would come whether she argued or begged. The team would demand compliance and ask kind questions that hurt. I'll draw them, she said. You take the first tranche out through the culvert and the clock ladder. No straight lines. If you hear me set the decoy, wait 60 seconds, then move. The librarian's mouth thinned. We can both. No, she said, and it came out like a note struck true. If they find you, they find us both. If they find me, maybe they hesitate. She pulled a cable from her pocket, a string of lanterns wired to a switch that could turn night loud. She built it for festivals that never happened, for comfort more than spectacle. Tonight it would be a flare. I'll come back, the librarian said. You won't, she said. "You'll circle and wait. If I don't return in 10 minutes, you go to the grate. You call no one until the pledge has teeth." She jammed a folded blanket against the gate latch to hold the inch she had earned, enough for a cart edge if they returned fast. She set the lanterns along the corridor, one on a ledge, one in a bucket to give off a muffled thump when it lit, one behind the mirror at her door to throw a halo. She placed the cassette player in the center of the floor with the lullaby cued to the refrain. Home is bait. Home is shield. The librarian's hand brushed her sleeve. Brief. Grateful. A benediction without sermon. Then they pushed the first cart toward the darkness, wheels newly careful, blankets holding. She waited, counted to 60, breathed once more, and flipped the switch. Light cascaded down the walls like sunrise underwater. The lullaby rose, tender and stubborn, a sound that knew how to live in echoes. She stepped into the spill and let the beams draw lines across her figure, then moved where she needed to be. Visible, unafraid, buying time with the only currency she had left. Flashlight beams stitched the dark into strips of daylight, jittering as boots slid on wet tile. Radios crackled. Someone called, "Hold position," and the echo made it sound like an order from the tunnel itself. She stepped forward until the cones of light met her and stopped, hands open, shoulders square. The lullaby floated around them, soft as steam. "Ma'am, turn around and keep your hands visible," an officer said, breath tight, protocol riding his tongue. "I'm not armed," she answered, steady. "You're looking for theft or trespass. You found stewardship. Identify yourself." She looked past the lights to the shapes behind them. "I keep what your city forgets. I return what I can. I do no harm." She gestured with 2 fingers toward the shelves behind her door. "If you flood this spur tonight, you drown 100 paths home." "Step away from the doorway," the supervisor said. He had the kind of voice that had lost patience before the shift began. "This site is marked for decommission. Our job is safety." "Safety for whom?" she asked. "For concrete? For schedules? Or for the people whose names are on those index cards waiting to be called?" A beam wavered, then steadied. Another officer's tone softened. "What is this place?" She breathed once. Then she let the answer be simple. "An archive of the city's losses. Not a stash. A promise. Notes with phone numbers. Tapes with songs. Keys with tags that say, 'Please return.' I keep consent where it exists. I hold silence where it's asked for. I'm asking you to pause." The lullaby reached the refrain, 3 notes that felt like leaning against a doorway at dusk. She bent, slow and deliberate, and lifted the cassette player so the sound rose level with their ears. "Listen," she said. "You've stood in kitchens where this was sung. You've waited by windows for someone to come home to this." Silence shifted. A woman in the line blinked hard and let her light drop a few inches. "My mother sang that," she murmured, not meaning to say it out loud. "Protocol," the supervisor snapped, as if cutting through fog. He pressed his mic, eyes on her. "Begin pump prep. We're behind." She reached into her pack and drew out the ledger, the spine taped, the corners softened by use. She kept it open, tilted toward the light without stepping closer. "There's a record. Provenance, not possession. Consent notes where I could find them. Return addresses. Nothing leaves this room without a path back or a reason to stay." The supervisor's jaw worked. "Paper doesn't change orders." "Then hear a voice that might," the librarian said, arriving at the edge of the cone of light, breath controlled, hands raised to show they were empty. Their presence cut differently. No threat, only intent. You don't know me. I'm a professional custodian of public memory. I have a council member on the line who can authorize a temporary stay under emergency cultural preservation guidelines. The supervisor didn't lower his radio, but his eyes flicked to the librarian. Who called you? Stewardship called me, they said, and the words landed without heat. No cameras, no press. Just a request to delay irreversible damage for review. They lifted a phone on speaker, the screen dimmed. A voice, calm and professional, filled the corridor. Remote but present enough. Officer, the council member said. I am authorizing a temporary hold for assessment. Hours, not days. I understand safety. I also understand the public interest in safeguarding potential cultural material. Maintain perimeter. Suspend pumps pending inspection. We'll document liability. The supervisor's mouth thinned. His thumb hovered, then eased off the mic. Copy, he said to no one in particular, which meant everyone. He looked back at her. You're not to move anything until the assessor arrives. She held his gaze. If the water rises, it won't wait for a clipboard. We have hours, the librarian said quietly, stepping between pressure and panic. Not many. Enough to triage without chaos. The supervisor's shoulders shifted. A grudging recalibration. You'll be accompanied. Observed, she corrected. Not filmed. Not handled without gloves. And no names leave this corridor. One of the officers nodded slowly. A human agreement that outranked the script. I'll stand there, she said, indicating a point near the door. And I won't touch anything. But I'm not going to watch it drown if I can stop it. The lullaby clicked, turned, and began again. The tape's small wheels faithful. The air felt different, still tense, but threaded with a permission that hadn't existed a minute before. She set the ledger on a crate, flipped to a page where a consent form had been paper-clipped, and let them see the signature blur into a first name, and a line that said, "Return if asked." Hours, the supervisor repeated, making the word a warning and a concession. He gestured to the radio operator. "Hold pumps, stand by." She nodded once, not grateful, only exact. Hours are enough to honor the first rule, she said. Dignity first. Then she looked at the librarian. We start with names. They moved as if inside a held breath. Hours sounded generous until countdowns put teeth on them. She opened the ledger to the first page flagged with a paperclip and drew a small star beside names that came with phone numbers or streets. These first, she said, and the librarian nodded, already unspooling a portable scanner the size of a hardback, gloves pulled tight like second skin. They made a triage line, boxes with names, boxes with contact paths, a dentist's reminder card, a church schedule with a handwritten note, a torn envelope corner bearing a partial zip. The nameless ones formed a ring around them like witnesses. The officer by the door stood with her arms folded, eyes careful, not unkind. The scanner purred, slow and steady. Each document slid under the light and came back into her hands a little safer. She added a voice memo into a pocket recorder as each box left her reach. A habit without ritual until now. Returning you to your street, she told a stack of letters tied with blue yarn. Holding you in the city's light, she said to a photograph where a father's hand hovered over a toddler's shoulder. Waiting with you, she whispered to a lone key tagged with a phone number that might still connect. Water nosed under the door, curious at first, then decided. It seeped into hairline cracks and gathered along the edge like thought pooling before speech. The room shivered with the low, distant thrum of machinery waking to its assignment. She didn't look at the water. Looking would cost seconds. She looked at the ledger and read the next starred name.
"Call after," the librarian said, sensing the pull.
"We'll cross-reference. We'll ask, not tell. Consent first." "Consent first," she echoed, and felt steadier. They packed crates with a rhythm that learned itself. A scan, a wrap, a label written clean and plain, a quiet blessing. The officer took over the door, redirecting a curious boot without touching it, reminding a colleague that observation meant stillness. The lullaby clicked and turned again, softer now under the rising hum, stubborn as a heartbeat. When the water lifted a curl of paper from the lowest shelf, she made a rule she hadn't wanted. "Cut the nameless loose," she said, and the words scraped. "We copy what we can. Originals stay unless at risk of drowning now." The librarian looked at her, grief and agreement sharing space. They raised the scanner and went faster without hurrying, compressing care into smaller gestures. She reached for a box at the back of the top shelf and stopped. The tape along its edge was hers, but the handwriting wasn't. The label said only, "First." She slid it forward, aware of the way her hands changed when they touched it, slower, as if greeting an old friend. Inside lay photographs of a girl on a stoop pretending the concrete was a stage. A journal with a busted elastic. The first index card she had ever written, the letters too neat, trying to prove something. The page where she'd called herself Archivist and waited to see if the word would accept her. The librarian saw the shift. "Yours?" they asked gently, not assuming anything. She nodded. The tape buzzed in the player as if it were listening too. "If something has to stay," she said, and realized she had known this moment would come since the first orange arrow bloomed on stone. "It should be mine." She lifted her box, felt its whole history compress into the weight against her palms, and looked up at the wall where a steel beam crossed like a shelf too high for easy reach. The ladder was gone. The gate was half-wedged. Time was a fast river. She stacked a crate, then another, the librarian bracing each with their hands. The officer stepped forward, then stopped herself. The rule she'd made with her body to stay outside the threshold warring with the human urge to help. "Careful," she said, voice small. She climbed onto the makeshift step, balanced, and raised the box into the beam's shadow. The metal was cold, damp sweating from it. She slid the box onto the beam, fitting it against a flange where water would hesitate to reach. From her pocket she drew a folded index card and a stub of pencil. Her hand didn't shake. She wrote, "If found, archive me too." She tucked the card beneath the string so it faced out, a small, stubborn declaration. Below, the librarian scanned the last sheet in their hands and closed the device. The water lapped audibly now, an animal testing a boundary. The supervisor's radio hissed with a question he didn't ask aloud. Hours had become minutes. She climbed down, legs alive with tremor, and placed her palm on the door she had built out of other doors. The lullaby reached its end, clicked, and didn't turn again. For a second, the room held nothing but breath. She turned the bolt with a steady hand and listened to the metal speak. "We'll go," she said, and meant it in 3 ways at once. "Give me the ledger," the librarian said. "I'll carry that. You take the tapes." She hesitated, then handed over the ledger. Trust had cost her once. It would buy them now. They lifted the last crate they could spare, labels neat, corners taped. She took one last look at the high beam, at the card peeking like a small flag, and let herself feel the cut. Then, she closed the door, a soft click that sounded like a promise kept, even as water pressed its ear to the other side.
Weeks later, light pooled across a small reading room above ground.
Shelves held quiet spines and anonymous dedications. A tape deck played the lullaby low, steady as breath. People arrived softly, signed in, and found fragments waiting like keys. A woman pressed a Polaroid to her chest. A man traced his name on an envelope and sat down. She chose a name at the desk, simple, hers. No spectacle, just stewardship with doors open. Some reclaimed, some added, all respected. Framed near the exit, a card read, "If found, archive me too." She carried an empty crate home, listening for rumors underground. The cassette clicked. The lullaby drifted over faces leaning toward memory. If this story touched you, share one small thing you'd save, and tell us why it matters. Subscribe for weekly journeys into hidden resilience, and watch next. The Lighthouse Keeper's logbook that rewrote a coastline.